I'm Nancy Target from the University of Delaware, and I wanted to come back to your discussion of terminology. And you noted that global warming was a phrase that ended up being sort of tainted. It generated a sort of an emotional response in a number of people and captured something that was sort of inaccurate about the way we needed to move forward with climate change. My question to you is, do you think climate change also gets that sort of emotive response from people? When I'm out talking to people, sometimes you use the word climate change and you can see them close off to any discussion and arguments. And I wonder if we need to reframe it in a way in which we somehow move to some words and phrases that get less of an emotional response. Wondered about your perspective on that.
It's a good question. I think there are two kinds of responses to the term climate change as opposed to global warming that probably aren't helpful. The first one is the same phenomenon we were talking about before. Is it folks who realize that climate change is just another word for global warming, which just is another word for human impact on global climate, and they're against it in part because they believe that either the remedies are intolerable or the remedies are costlier than the benefits of avoiding the problem, whatever it is. The second negative response to climate change is the response from folks who say, look, we've taken a little science and we know that Earth's climate has been changing over hundreds of thousands and hundreds of millions of years. This is a natural process. The trouble is the term climate change, of course, in itself doesn't really distinguish, neither does global warming actually, between human and natural causes, but climate change tends to reinforce this perception that it's something that's been happening all along. And of course, the reality is it has been happening all along, but in previous periods of climate change, there weren't 7 billion people heading for 10 billion living on the planet and needing to be supported. And the pace of natural climate change over most of the hundreds of millions of years that we know something about it has been much more gradual than the pace that we're imposing on the system now. I do think climate disruption is more effective and accurate because it really implies we're doing something to the climate, which we are. But it doesn't solve that first problem, which the very first questioner asked about. Please.
Hello, my name is Joanna Huckster. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Delaware. Dean Target is the dean of my college. I first wanted to thank you. It was an excellent talk, and you've given me some ammunition as a hopeful future educator on climate change to use, so thank you. I have been doing some research and have found, like we've said, that people are more concerned about climate change. But the recent research has also shown that that the average American doesn't understand very much about how it happens. And you touched on this some in your talk, but I was wondering if you could address maybe who you believe should be addressing the general public and making the science more accessible. I know that this is a room full of people who are mostly interested in education, but not just of students, but of the general public. Who you think should be making those addresses and how you think they should be made. Thank you.
Well, it's another tough question. There actually is quite a lot going on. One has some great websites out there that people can be directed to. realclimate.org for the more technically inclined, Climate Central for those who are less technically inclined. I think all of us who understand the magnitude of this challenge should be taking every opportunity to educate in every way we can. And that means, talking to acquaintances and neighbors. It means directing people to these good websites. It means supporting political leaders who are willing to talk about it. It means telling people about the documentaries that appear on television. I mean, the classic problem with documentaries is the people who watch them are the people who are already convinced. We got to get more. I mean, there's terrific stuff on television about this all the time, and we got to get more people to watch it. But again, I think fundamentally, doing education about how science works and where authority and credibility in science come from peer review, from the correlation of observation and experiment and theory, from bringing together different lines of evidence. I mean, if we could get more effective at talking to people about how science works, the way the pieces of the puzzle fit together in this case would become compelling. But everybody's got a different take on this. You know, we've got folks whose strength is in economics. I wish more of those would look at the economic dimensions of this question, because we're constantly hearing about how it's too expensive to fix it, but not enough people are talking about how expensive it's going to be not to fix it. And again, we see examples of that when you look at the rising costs of floods and droughts and wildfires and rising sea level. And the costs of not fixing this are going to be extraordinary. We need more economists looking at both sides. We need more engineers talking about the options for getting the energy and the energy services that we need in energy saving and climate sparing ways. There are huge opportunities there. We need more folks talking about the basic proposition that our well-being is not just a matter of economic conditions and processes, but also a matter of environmental conditions and processes and socio-political conditions and processes. I sometimes say our well-being sits on a three-legged stool, and guess what? A stool falls over if you pull out any leg. We need to be all, in a sense, better educators about how the pieces fit together and why this is not something that can be separated and put aside in terms of all of the dimensions of our well-being.
We can accommodate these 4 questions, but we'll have to bring the program to a conclusion. Please.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Holdren. My name is David May. I work at the University System of Maryland with Dr. Kerwin, among others. I appreciated your presentation very much. It was very interesting, so thank you. I wanted to call into question the idea that we need to spend time arguing with skeptics. If we do, in fact, have 70 to 75% of the public on our side who are already concerned about it, I think we need to concentrate on using our majority to work on mitigation and adaptation. As my friend Don Langenberg likes to point out, it only takes about 15% of a population to enact a revolution, and I think that's what we need. So to use our majority for mitigation and adaptation, I think about, in terms of changing the economy, it does, the energy sector in particular clearly needs to change very quickly toward more renewable energy sources and sustainable, such as wind power, which is already a mature industry in many ways. When those skeptics say we need to, it's impossible for the economy to turn on a dime like that, it is, I understand, politically difficult, but in this certain political climate. But I just think back to World War II, when the entire auto industry turned on a dime to start putting out planes and tanks. And there was a national consensus that needed to happen, and it happened very, very quickly. And I think about that when I think about what's needed here. So what are your thoughts about the prospects toward putting our efforts toward turning around the economy as quickly as possible so that we can mitigate the climate change as quickly as we can?
Well, you lay out an important challenge. One of the reasons I think it continues to be necessary to address the arguments put forward by skeptics is that many members of Congress take them very seriously. And if you want a majority of Congress to vote ultimately for measures that would put a price on carbon, for example, which I certainly believe ultimately we're going to need, you need to some extent to take those arguments away from them, if only through public pressure. More of the public needs to understand why those arguments are wrong in order to maintain the pressure on their elected representatives. At the same time, I'm all in favor of getting everything we can get done right now with the votes we have and the rationales we have right now. So it's not really an either or. Let's go over here.
Thank you, Dr. Holdren. My name is Leanne Hutchison, and I'm an environmental education specialist with the Maryland State Department of Education. I'm also responsible for teaching pre-service teachers at Washington College. One of my goals is to increase the percentage of students who have direct partnerships with the scientists, including NOAA scientists who are studying climate change. My question is very simple. How do you define STEM?
Well, I define STEM as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You know, it has become the popular acronym for all of those domains at every level. You know, the president talks about raising our game in STEM education at every level, from preschool through grad school, and then he adds lifelong education, a bow to Professor Langenberg. But I mean, let me just mention that the notion of bringing real scientists, engineers, and mathematicians into classrooms with K through 12 kids is a great idea, and it's at the heart of one of the president's initiatives in this domain called Educate to Innovate, where we've gotten $700 million in philanthropic and private sector support, both money and in kind, with now more than 100 CEOs of high-tech corporations involved. And we are having engineers, scientists, mathematicians from the private sector, the academic sector, the national laboratories, going into classrooms, working with teachers to improve science content, and particularly hands-on science and engineering and mathematics activities, but also serving as role models so that kids understand what exciting careers are actually out there in the STEM fields. And we have a lot of ideas about how to move this forward, and some of them are happening.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Ross Salowich. I teach here in College Park, and thank you for delivering a great talk. I agree with Chancellor Kerwin. That's the best I've ever heard on this topic. My question is related to our grid, energy grid. When I give a talk like this, I like to conclude by saying that if I were in charge, and so I'm going to take this opportunity to speak to someone who has the ear of someone in charge, what I say is, if I were in charge, what I would do is I would nationalize the grid, and I would institute a two-tiered price structure, because I believe in capitalism. An energy provider gets one price if they put energy into the grid. If they don't release CO2, they get a different price if they release CO2, and all the government does is regulate that price difference. And I think if we took a bold step like that, and let capitalism do its job, then we would get the renewable energy we need to get out of this crisis.
It's a very interesting idea, and there are a lot of different ways to basically put a price on carbon and let the market work. And I think virtually any of them would be better than no price on carbon, which is what we have now. I think the only fallacy in your proposition, and I should start before I talk about a fallacy saying thank you very much for your kind remarks on my talk, but the fallacy in your proposition is that there's someone in charge. That is, I would love it. I would love it if the President of the United States had the authority on his own to do some of the things that need to be done, including any number of the different ways to put a price on carbon. Unfortunately, that particular one, putting a price on carbon, is very hard to do without the Congress. And so we get back to where we've been for much of this Q&A. But it's a good point, and thanks for the question.